Hello, I'm James. Thank you for joining us, Dan and Doug from Duga Digital, one of our key partners that we're working with Addingwell. It's great to have you here today to talk about server-side tracking and what's going on in the market today. So just to kick things off, could you introduce Duga Digital, the background, how it all started, how you guys came together, and what you're doing as a business today?
Sure. So I started Duga Digital in February 2021. It was a side of desk piece during COVID. I had lots of time on my hands because previously I was working for TUI Group, and I had spent 2019, I took 94 flights, which was quite hard. And I had spent a lot of time in taxis, on airplanes, in airports, and in meeting rooms, waiting, and lots of time available. Took some of that time back and started consulting for smaller businesses that I knew. That, as these things tend to do if you're successful at things, snowballed a bit and went into bigger clients, bigger projects, eventually wasn't side of desk anymore, and then started to build out the team. So there are now 5 of us. Doug came on board last April, in April 2024, and started building out more products, and that's kind of the journey we've taken.
Cool, thanks. And for you, Doug?
So as Dan said, I'm coming up to my first year anniversary. We'll have that discussion at some point. Hopefully the review will be good because it has been an amazing year. So I've been working. I've known Dan for 12 years now. We met at a conference about 12 years ago. Yep. Stayed in touch. As I became available, we had a conversation. So having been around the industry for 28 years or so, had great fun, learned a lot, done a lot of technology, spoken to a lot of people, had a lot of experiences. And I'm bringing all that now to Duga for our clients, really having a fantastic time working with fantastic partners and fantastic clients as well.
And how would you guys say you support businesses? So if you could give yourself a strap line as to this is what we do, how would you describe that?
Well, I think Dan, you should explain the meaning of Duga, because I think that was what really spoke to me in terms of the values of the company. So I think it speaks well of the approach.
Yeah, I think the approach, the meaning of Duga is actually an old English Norse word, which means to help or to produce. And I effectively set up Duga because I know a lot about analytics and had seen some gaps in the industry and didn't think that there was necessarily the right level of coverage there specifically for analytics. Some of it was driven too much of it was driven by media optimization or media bank balances. And then, as Doug says, like the approach there is how can we standardize that? How can we make it easier for marketers to access what they need to be able to bring more revenue in or save cost, and ultimately go from there. So the way that some of the problems that we fix with clients. So at the moment we've got a couple of very, very large businesses who have lost their trust in their data, and we're trying to help them redress that, understand where the challenges are coming from, and actually fix the data collection so that the data looks the shape that they expect and that they're comfortable with. Other pieces we'll probably come on to later, more technical, and so how can we actually collect the best possible data, make it as robust as possible, and look to future-proof that for media optimization. I'm not completely against that, but the idea obviously is then how do we make sure that they're making more money from the investments they're making.
I think your point, Dan, about trust and having trust in the data, that is really difficult for a lot of clients. Now, working with in previous jobs in my career, working with really large clients, to be able to achieve high quality every single time is actually really hard. So this is why our approach for an awful lot of the services we provide is to really rely on automation. And it's automation that allows us to work with large businesses. We can help smaller businesses scale. We can do it accurately, and we can ensure that quality happens every single time. And that's something we are going to talk about more on. But it's really essential to have that repeatability, the scalability, and the accuracy. And that's how trust in data, trust in what the data is telling you, that's where it comes from.
And would you say that's your secret sauce that makes doing what you do a success?
Well, I think that's why we can be a smaller, leaner team than a lot of other agencies, a lot of other departments who are trying to do similar things. I think that gives us the ability to say, to Doug's point, here's the accuracy you want without the necessary human error that would occur otherwise. One of my previous roles was starting the analytics team at Brain Labs. So I've worked agency side before, completely comfortable with that idea. I think it's a great company, but I knew when I started Duga that actually there was something missing, and there was something that we could do more of and be a bit more clinical. And everyone talks AI. We're not going there today, and I hope we don't go there today. But the idea, but that is the idea for a lot of this, is what can be done in a quicker, faster, but repeatable and accurate way. So I don't know if there's a secret sauce. Well, hopefully we're quite nice to work with as well.
Well, it gives us the opportunity to be really fully transparent about what we do, how we do it, how it's done.
Yeah.
Because the automation produces this accountable, auditable trail of what it's done.
True.
It is completely repeatable, and it's quite different to having an army of people who are hitting the keys, working on a project, trying to do the same thing, where we've got to, we can't prove what has been done in that instance. But with the automation, we can literally use the data exhaust from the automation to say, yes, this is exactly what has been done, and here's why.
Cool, so thanks for that introduction to Duga. So we'll talk a little bit more about the methodologies behind that shortly. So now let's jump into the market that we live in today and what's going on out there when it comes to GTM, Google Tag Manager, client side, server side. So to start with, could you give us your perspective of why brands should move from client side to server side, the typical challenges that you see, your experience with working with server side technology?
The really compelling case that we come across an awful lot is with clients who are seeking to optimize and maximize the return on the data. They're activating the data in some way. But with client-side data, they know they're dealing with a subset of the data that they could be working with. So thinking about the commercial imperative, what does more data mean? More data means a bottom line impact on media, on personalization, on any form of activation, modeling.
I think there are key areas throughout the digital data lifecycle now that need to be optimized. Previously, you've got things like the client-side GTM, you've got things like your marketing pixels, and that was deemed success. That was deemed to be placed on the site, and it would collect data, and everyone was happy that they were getting the most robust data possible. Now, you've got consent. That needs to be managed carefully, and you need to make sure that users' choices are managed to the point where you're comfortable, technically and legally. Then, once you're onto the site, you've clicked consent. You've got how are you collecting the data using a tag management system, GTM. That needs to be managed and optimized in itself. You can go client side, that is still an option, but it's not the most robust option. So the server side piece becomes a question. Again, this is where we see a lot of services and how we optimize that and automate it, as Doug said. And then when you collected the data, how is that being viewed? How is it being managed? Can you see, as a retailer or an e-com site, can you see everything you need to be able to see about your categories, your items as you go through to purchase? Do you get the data you need there? And that all comes from the first 2 points down there. And then if even further downstream, you go into data warehousing, how does that data look in a raw export? How does that get transformed to the point where it's actually usable for data science teams? How is it usable for dashboarding? How is it usable to complete the circle, go back into the advertising that brought you to the site in the first place? So the question around why do clients move from client side to server side is to be as robust as possible, to maintain control throughout, and to remove some of the client side third-party tags from the website that can cause page loading delays. If you've got a GTM container with 1,000 tags in it, that container will take longer to load client side than if there's one of 200 tags, because it's just going to go through and check everything. So the idea here is how can we remove some of that pain? How can we be consistent in our data? i.e., we've seen a couple of weeks ago, we had a conversation with a client where we were sending GA data, Google Ads data, and Facebook data, and they all aligned. It was brilliant. That is where we want to get to with every client. And so, yeah, I think those are the reasons that they're really looking to move, is to maintain that control and consistency and give the trust back to the teams that they're empowering with the amount of money that goes through digital marketing right now.
I think your point about the third-party tags, I think it's a really good one. And for so long now, putting a third party or sharing data with a third party, for the last 18 months, third party has been a dirty word. And third-party cookies going away or not, third-party data in of itself is not a bad thing, actually. It's a really, really useful thing for businesses. So, but how do you go about sharing that data with a third party in a way that's accountable, in a way that is responsible and accurate and robust? And doing that client side doesn't do all of those things. Removing a third-party library from the website is a good thing in that, as Dan says, you get more performance side. Great. But then moving that tag server-side also gives you, as Dan said, accountability and control and governance over what data is shared with who. So that ability to further respect users' privacy is a significant advantage in terms of regulatory compliance, but also it's just doing the right thing. And it's that trust in the data that the user has as well as the business. That's a very good thing. There's a lot of discussion around compliance and how server-side technologies enhance compliance and give you the ability to be more robust in regulatory compliance. Fantastic. Commercially, there are significant advantages in terms of being able to measure the profitability of a transaction, but doing that in a privacy-safe way, not exposing intellectual property, to be able to enrich data as well as redact data to prevent ingesting PII. These are all significant advantages that are now really apparent with server-side and a really compelling reason to change how you do your data collection.
So what you're saying there is really it's impacting both the user of the website from there's more control of how their data is being collected.
Yep.
But flip side as well for the website owner to make sure that they are collecting and passing it to their partners in a controlled way, that they're not sending everything across.
Yeah, it's a way of getting even more value from the data that hasn't been available previously, but doing it in a way that is compliant, legal, ethically sound, and commercially very valuable.
I think it's the one thing I've noticed with our clients who've moved into the server-side world has been the amount of times that they can connect marketing data, which has traditionally been siloed in marketing platforms, advertising platforms, however you want to go. You can take Google or Meta as your starting points there. But by bringing that server-side, you can actually start to bring business data, like Doug mentions, with margin, profitability, availability, stock levels, all of these kinds of business data. You can start to merge the two and actually start to get into interesting use cases. Previously, these two worlds lived too far apart to make actually any beneficial commercial realities for them. Now, completely possible, very quickly.
Data living in isolation, or any data that remains isolated and not joined with other data sets, is by definition undervalued.
Yeah.
And do you see server-side as the connector between those data sets, or one of the influencers to connect that data correctly?
Certainly the most robust one. I mean, it is possible client-side. There are more steps, which removes simplicity. There's going to be more gaps, guaranteed, which removes a lot of value. And then potentially it causes issues in how you deliver that back. So there might not be the same mechanism. If you can get to the business mechanisms, I say business, I mean the internal runnings rather than the marketing side, that's how a business can operate almost without marketing if it needs to. So if you can associate itself in there, then yeah, I can't see any better way of doing it right now.
server side as a nexus for different ingestion points. To use flowery language there, but you could have data coming from websites, you could have offline data coming in as well, third-party geolocation data, all being combined at the point of collection. So that it makes the export, load, transform downstream, makes the warehouse integration much more useful, valuable.
And one of the things that we've talked about earlier is obviously the impact by Safari ITP restrictions. That is a problem of client side today, whereas server side, do you see that as a solution to that? How are you viewing that?
It's doing cookies the way the regulators want you to do cookies, and they want you to do cookies this way because it's better for the user. So I say, if I've got a data point that's sitting in a browser that can be read by anybody, that's not particularly respectful of the user's privacy choice. So yes, you still have a first-party cookie, but it's done in the right way, that is compliant, right for the user, and actually is better technically for the website owner anyway, because the cookie deletion, it's harmful to the data quality. So ticking all these boxes, it's all upside. Why wouldn't you?
And you've seen the material impact of Safari going from 7 days to extending the life of that to 30 months. Do you see that helps attribution? How do you see that impacts the analytics collected on the client side?
Yeah, I think it definitely helps attribution. It also helps give clients confidence in what they've got, because having one browser act in a certain way, having another browser act in a completely different way, it makes advertising very difficult, because not advertising on a browser basis, you're advertising at most on a device basis if you're lucky. And the idea there is, how can we be consistent across everything? So then you can start to measure properly, if I can use that word. Because at the moment there are some marginal measurements that are taking place that may give slight steers in different directions, but fundamentally you haven't got that full visibility, and that's a much wider challenge than just server side, but this at least goes some way to help understanding that.
So it sounds like there's a lot of advantages to switching to server side, but what are the most common hesitancies you see from a client not wanting to move from client side to server side?
I think it's seen as something very technical. I think it's seen as being complicated. I think there is a concern about the unknown. There's a lot of thoughts that people think they know what server side means and how they want it done. But generally speaking, there is a gap in knowledge there, and it's that gap that is a barrier to taking a step forwards.
Yeah. And I think that's where as the Duga process has tried to isolate some of those challenges and remove the barriers as much as possible. So the idea here would be, at an overall level, take what you've got today in client-side GTM and mirror it in server-side GTM, and make sure that is as close to it as possible. We do that through automations, so cleaning the client-side GTM to get that as robust as possible, having that in place. Then auto SGTM, which, as you might expect, does exactly that. It automates the process from client-side GTM into server-side, and then having it hosted on Addingwell as an idea. That gives you the comfort and the trust that it's got the SLAs on uptime. There's no cloud engineering required on the client side. These pieces fall into the pieces of the puzzle fall into themselves, because actually it makes sense and it becomes robust. One of the other pieces that we have had, pushback on is, or objections around, has been, why would I go from a free client-side version to a cost in server-side? My argument there would be something like, you're going to pay for what you get, i.e. it might pay for itself on the advertising side. Depending on your uplift that you see, you might be able to get that back, and it might be that the piece of data that's collected for customer XYZ happens to be a high margin prospect with a high LTV, and they stay with you for the next 20 years. I wouldn't want to miss that out.
I'm not afraid to admit that we operationalize the migration to server side to an extent that it becomes boring. As it should be. It works. And it changes the project from one of being a technology change to one of management to one of change management rather than technology based. To your point earlier on around the change in client side to server side with first party cookies, that's going to make data different. It's surprising sometimes to see fewer users because the site or the cookie tenure. It's a more robust first-party cookie, so it sticks around for longer, so it can remember users for longer. So you'll see an increase in lifetime value, but across fewer users, overall increase in data. Now, to Dan's point around the methodology to run client-side and server-side in parallel for a period of time to quantify that change, that takes the mystery out. That explains what changes, why it changes, how much it's going to change, and therefore the value of going to server side. Again, to Dan's point, it becomes a business case. It becomes less a technology equation, less of a technology project, much more of a sound business investment with a really solid bottom line impact.
So the way we do that, well, just to elaborate on that, is we have a dashboard that will show the client side statistics and the server side statistics side by side, and on the same KPIs that can be read and easily comparable. The idea here is that we achieve two things. One is a demonstration, as Doug said, around the business case, and the second is we demonstrate back to the company or the client that X person who has come to do this has done what they set out to do. Ultimately, I'm going to say this loosely, we make our clients look good in their end of year reviews. Because they've achieved what they wanted to do, there's an uplift that they were looking for, and they understand now that they've got the most robust data collection possible.
And do you have a benchmark that you use when you're speaking to clients around what the uplift is from client side to server side? So what you would say this is an industry standard that we've seen from our experience?
I think it's a standard technique on ads to say results may vary, but no, there is a.
As a ballpark.
Yeah, depending on the business. No, it's a fair question. Depending on the type of business, you could see. And I'll be absolutely clear here, what we're measuring against is the optimized client side against an optimized server side. I think that is a fair comparison. Yeah, if we turn up to a brownfield site and the client side measurement is clearly broken, then it's an unfair measurement. But that fair measurement, we're looking at, I think we've seen north of 10% is what we would expect in terms of overall data volume increase.
Yep.
So the other aspect is around the cookie tenure and having robust cookies. That's something where we see a lot more impact on lifetime value for an e-com client. That's significant. Engagement metrics over time for publishing clients. You see that there are different metrics. It depends on the KPI, but we are seeing significant changes around that.
So it's the value of collecting the data correctly upstream is then being benefited, as you were saying earlier, Dan, downstream with the activation of that data.
Exactly. Yeah. So the fewer conversions that you miss as a client, obviously the more that the more return on ad spend you're seeing, the better business case you can build for further investment. It gives the transparency back to the marketing team to say, I can see can see the attributed view of what I'm looking at, rather than there being some guesswork and not being able to see what they want to see. And then it demonstrates to the business, this is as full a lens as we can get right now. And to Doug's point, the cookie tenure piece there does cause some questions, but actually the fundamental is you're getting closer to the truth, not further away from it. You might be taking data out, but you're getting closer to what you should be seeing anyway.
And then when you speak to a client, who normally owns the server-side project? What teams are you engaging with? Is it a mixed bag? How does it normally work?
I own it. No, joking aside, it's a great question around ownership and accountability, and it's a key part of how we start working with a client. Up front, we will engage with the key stakeholders. We'll have a round of interviews with the stakeholders to understand the client's business, understand the challenges, understand the pain points, understand the opportunities. So we're bringing technology, we're bringing our experience and knowledge of the technology of the platform, which the client doesn't have. And this round of interviews gives us the opportunity to build that foundational knowledge that joins the technical expertise with the exact needs of the client. That establishes the client is the owner. Obviously, we can establish roles, responsibilities, and the right way forward for the client.
Yeah, I think it's completely fair. There's usually a marketing angle in. Usually marketing are the ones who want to get close to their data and understand what's happening. Completely reasonable. And then it becomes a process that we have to go through, and there are some technical changes, so we do have to invite the technical folk in to make sure that they're completely abreast of the situation and what happens.
The technical folk?
Well, the technical folk.
do they wear a strange hat?
They should do, the technical folk. What, the tech guys, girls?
Yeah, the tech people.
The tech people,
right.
Yes, the tech. Yeah, folk was the right collective noun.
Okay, fine.
I think that's right.
The challenge there obviously is that we have to make sure that everyone is aligned and understands what's going on, and because we don't own the website, we need to make sure that each piece of the puzzle has been solved before we get there. So yeah, it's quite an encompassing project, but that's to Doug's point. It is change management at the end of it.
Well, it's essential. What we're looking for is accuracy in the data, and the accuracy in the execution of that data collection is part and parcel of that ultimate data quality. It starts with the most accurate specification up front, and we can only do that by communicating, by understanding, and being part of the client team.
So for you, it's really important to almost feel part of the client, be inside and speaking to the different teams to understand what their requirements and scope are.
That's essential. Equally, this is going to be a new technology, so there is a new vocabulary. So it's part of the knowledge transfer, and that's something we work on with clients, as well as being able to make sure that understanding, that any gaps in the knowledge are addressed throughout the entire project.
Would you find with server side there's a lot of education still to be done on the market?
Yeah, I think there's a fair amount. I think at the moment still server side sounds scary, sounds technical, sounds outside of my wheelhouse if I'm a marketing manager. I think there is definitely more of a popularity for it, i.e. people have heard of it and they want to talk about it, and sometimes that can actually breed misconceptions. So you're kind of having this balance between I've heard nothing or I've heard something and they've not quite grasped the concepts that you'd want them to. But that is where we come in. Sometimes we have challenges to each other and we say, I'm not sure how to approach this, but this part of our role is to bring that knowledge and make sure everyone is comfortable and confident with what's happening.
I think there's a foundational knowledge of what it is, what it isn't, and then when we have the stakeholder interviews and we understand the business and the needs and what pain points need to be addressed, then it becomes a question of the art of what's possible. And I think the gaps in the knowledge are actually opportunities. You can say, yes, we can do that with the server side where we couldn't do that previously. I think that's exciting stuff.
Yeah, I think the other thing is that there's, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, because obviously Addingwell being a French company, I know that there's a significant breadth of clients across France, and that's a very, privacy conscious and regulatory conscious country. In the UK, there's not massive uptake. I mean, we talked earlier about 30% of the top 200 advertisers potentially, and then about 15, maybe 18% of the top 1,000 advertisers on server side right now on Google. That's quite small. And so I don't know whether there's a conscious choice that maybe that's not regulatory, they're not happy with the compliance angle, they're not happy with the fact that their users wouldn't necessarily be able to see that that's happening. There's a few bits there. So there is definitely a sort of persuasion angle, there's definitely a sort of a conversation around how do you want to use this, what's best for you, these kinds of things.
And for that 20-30% that you just mentioned, have you ever started to work with a client that has implemented server side themselves and you've had to unpick, review how they're doing it today because maybe it's not been implemented in the best way possible?
Yeah, there's some really good experiences we had with clients who were early adopters of server side. So they were actually running on App Engine, the original implementation, and we helped them migrate to Addingwell. So that was actually a very straightforward process. It was procedural. The actual again, it comes down to the quality of the client-side implementation, really having an influence on data quality, and taking them through the entire process, migrating from App Engine to Addingwell. No turning back. It's
the unpicking usually takes place if they're already on server side. It's usually very small, like the small end of the wedge, if you like, which is maybe sending page view traffic. It's then the complication that they've got to, which is I don't understand how to move all of my events, or I don't understand how to move my third-party advertising tags, or the list goes on. You've got a bunch of use cases that can be delivered server-side, but the complexity in the client mind grows. So they might have, as I say, the page view the starting point, but when it gets a bit more tricky, not sure how to do it.
I think your last point there, around it being tricky. The difference between looking at the Addingwell dashboard and a Google Cloud Platform, the console on GCP, is really quite different. Now, GCP console, a great tool, but unless the client has an army of cloud certified engineers, it's going to be quite a challenge and it's going to be a risk. Whereas the Addingwell dashboard, very, very approachable, human readable, easy to use, and actually richer in terms of what it's telling you than what is initially discoverable on Cloud Platform console. So that's a big change, but a big change in a positive sense. The clients' eyes are open to go, now I can see what's going on.
So if you were a marketing manager inside of an organisation that's looking to move from client side to server side, or existing server side setup to Addingwell, what would that look like?
Call me. Well, call down. Actually, yeah.
Call down. Yeah. I think you need to have a plan, and that's one of the reasons that we do, as Doug's mentioned a couple of times, we have a standard operating procedure to make sure that there is a checklist of things that go through, and we take that forward. I think there is. I would like to have a plan. I would like to have a conversation and understand you've mentioned they would want to do it. I'd understand why they want to do that. What are they looking for? Is this the next buzzword? Then maybe that's not for you, and maybe we need to have a think about it. Some of the things we talked about previously were, what's the threshold that you'd need to get there? I don't think there is a threshold, but I think the idea of having some commercial impact, i.e., are you spending a decent amount and you actually want to have the most robust measurement possible, that could be a use case. And that's a reasonable use case because you can quite easily and tangibly understand what the benefit would look like from server side or client side, server side comparison that I talked about. That's probably where I would start. And then after that, it becomes about flexibility. It becomes about multiple more use cases. But yeah, starting there is probably where I'd go.
Nothing else to add, carry on.
And by industry, if you're a marketing manager, how would you think about that? So if you're an e-commerce brand, what would you be thinking in terms of how do I need to justify moving to server side?
Well, I think for e-commerce and for retail and for anywhere that's heavily online based, it's almost a fundamental at this point. I think without it, you are losing control, you're possibly bloating your website page load speed, and you are potentially missing out on data that you could use to qualify future prospects or just understand how your current ones are working. So yeah, I think those are sort of fundamentals. This works across industries. We've worked with clients in the media spaces, worked with clients in food and beverage spaces. We've worked with clients in the review spaces and online marketplaces and everything else like this. So I think there's no real industry for this. It's more about the use cases that it can deliver.
I'd go out on a limb here and say there are the majority of e-com clients running GA4 are guaranteed going to be missing out on key data points, not because of the fragility of client side, more to do with the way GA4 works around e-commerce measurement, that is only solvable with server side. And if your only solution to get a full picture of the e-commerce journey for all the users is server side, then that's got to be a compelling argument there.
That really is a limb.
It is a limb to go on, but as you say, it's a must-have because an e-commerce brand is missing out on that opportunity?
Yeah, I think the other verticals that we worked with, I think media and publishing, I think the ability to enrich in the data, to really have that real world view of engagement with the media, with the ads being driven on site, and to have that realistic, accurate vision or accurate measurement of ad performance for a publisher is absolutely golden.
And for publishing, do you see the use case is more around the subscription conversion? That's where the real value is for server side in that space?
I think there's, now I can't get that word out of my head. For publishing specifically, I think there are subscription events obviously that are very important. I think the cookie tenure is actually quite important too, because it's not every publisher is lucky enough to have someone who comes back every week, every day, whatever it might look like. So there is a need to understand the broader audience. I think for publishing as well, we've definitely seen that there's something around needing to join that business data in. So actually having, I think we saw an example of, is it 29 or maybe 50 different custom attributes for different authors going into this digital analytics platform. And you think to yourself, I'm pretty sure that there is a platform, probably a CMS, that could push this into a data warehouse, not via a digital analytics platform. And then there's use cases that you get into there where I think it's not all about marketing in that case. Some of it's editorial, some of it's actually around the product. And you start to question these things, and by having server side available, you can start to join these data sets like we were talking about before, getting that business and marketing piece closer without having to push it all the way through marketing, and actually make yourself a better data set.
Next, we'll talk about Duga Digital and how you guys work. So we've already talked a little bit about high level your methodology, but could you explain, a client comes to you, what's your process? How does that work? What's the value that Duga Digital bring versus other agencies out there?
Sure. So if a client comes to us, we have a conversation. That's the first part. We start there. We'll probably have done our background research. We have something we call an outside-in pain point assessment, which needs renaming because it's longer than most people's addresses. And what we end up doing is having a conversation about what their users are, what their use cases might be, where they want to go, what they want to invest in. How does that look forward-thinking, or how can we be more robust about it? The approach we have, which is different to other agencies and consultants, might be that we've got only senior staff, so we've all got at least 10 years experience doing this. The other piece, so what I mean by that is I might be the face, but I'm also the doer. Doug is also a doer. Alex is also a doer. And so the process there looks a lot leaner. And so what we try and use is automation. So we've built a number of tools. Doug has built a number of tools around how scripts can automate using APIs for GTM, GA, and make sure that the accuracy, repeatability, and I guess the USP there is making sure that these things happen repeatably, very strong, and it gives us easy product packages that we can ultimately take to clients and say, this is what we think you need. Here is what you might need for a retail e-com site. These 4 things. Would you want us to deploy those? And it makes it much easier for marketers to say, I do want those things. That makes perfect sense to me. And I'm not saying we automate everything. We just walk away. We're very hands-on. We speak to them all the time, and we become part of their team that way. And they become sort of question and answer sessions rather than we're doing this project and we'll walk away now.
I think the last use case that you were talking about there I think it's a really good one, worth emphasising that these automations are repeatable and incremental. They're aware of what they've already done. So if we have a client-side container that we've run a clean on, and a third-party agency might implement a few new tags, maybe not to the standards that the client is expecting, so we rerun the clean, and we can phase the deployment of server-side. Typically start with GA4. Then we can move on to sets of third-party tags, other GMP tags, and we can phase these. So the automation is aware of what's already done. It won't overwrite what it's already done, and it will only migrate what is required. So it's very controlled, but very repeatable as well.
The other key difference that I would state is that we're completely independent. So I've mentioned before, I work with Brain Labs and other media agencies. We're a standalone digital analytics agency and we don't touch media. So there is no incentive, there is no bias, there is no mark your own homework. I'm just stating as it is, we fundamentally play Moneyball. We basically don't look at what's popular. This is the way that it's get done to the best possible quality for clients. No other incentive involved, really.
So the work that you do, the media side are seeing the benefits of that, but it's upstream, as we talked about earlier, where you're actually having that big impact for that client.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should say we also partner with media agencies. So it's not like I'm going away and saying that we partner with them to help them optimize, to make sure that they're getting the best value possible for the client and also for themselves to understand how they can better their campaigns next time. So there's that give and take in this, isn't there? So it's not completely black and white, which is, I guess, the world over, isn't it?
Well, we had some of the best client feedback I've ever heard, where the client said on the activation side, on the media side, they were now able to max out their budgets where they haven't been able to previously, because the client side data volume was not significant enough. With the server side data volume, moving the marketing data collection over to server side, they've maxed out the budgets. They were delighted.
And after you've done that investigation work that you spoke about a moment ago, how do you then present that back to the client? How do you work to explain what needs to be done?
We have a playbook. We have a playbook that goes to every client after we've done those investigative and discovery pieces. The playbook is, here's where we would recommend you walk through, what the roadmap looks like, how long that might take, and what's involved, and how things might shift. And so it's kind of there as you could call it an intro, as a sort of guide for them, but equally it acts as an asset long term, so they have the ability to refer back to it, understand what has changed and why it might have changed, which pieces have been completed, what the roadmap looks like. It becomes a real asset for everyone to guide them through, because there's lots of emails, there's lots of calls, everyone gets busy. This becomes a sort of a statue in the place.
And then before you move towards server side, what work do you do beforehand? So what preparation work needs to be done when you're working with the client? You mentioned about the automation tools. That's a prerequisite to being able to be in a position for the client to move to server side. Is that right?
Absolutely. I would say until such time as you have your client side container absolutely rock solid and best practice compliant, don't move to server side. You only want to migrate what is absolutely perfect and best practice. So that's something we will work with the client on through the automation, through the education. The client's responsible for setting up their own data collection subdomain. And obviously the client is the owner of the Addingwell account, and we'll support them with that every step of the way.
So do you have any interesting anecdotes when it comes to server-side tracking?
Well, funny you should ask, James. Talking about the automation, we were just talking about the automation, the running the clean and then running the migration. I started one this week actually, and I thought, okay, it's running. Go make a cup of tea. Something very English, I know. But by the time I made the cup of tea, was back at the desk, automation is completed. It's fire and forget, walk away. It's absolutely rock solid. It does not fail.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And now let's talk about the Duga Digital and Addingwell partnership. So you've helped several clients smoothly transition from client side to server side with Addingwell. Let's first of all start with how did Addingwell come about? How did you hear about us?
I've known of Addingwell for quite some years. Got a former colleague and great friend who introduced me to Addingwell. He's French, Addingwell being French, and that was the connection. And when it comes to doing server side the right way and having honestly the best service levels, we got in touch with Addingwell and went from strength to strength.
And we spoke about it briefly, but what does the integration look like and the setup for Addingwell?
Oh, easy. And I'll give you the sweet spot. One of the best use cases, one of the best case studies indeed, is for Shopify clients. The setup is just ridiculously straightforward. Not only using Addingwell for server-side, but also the Addingwell Shopify app to host GTM. It's the way Shopify want you to do that kind of integration. So it's Shopify compliant, setting up the cookie restore functionality, ridiculously easy, just smooth. It's technically very, very smooth indeed. As long as we are clear with the client, as we are in terms of the operationalization, the standard operating procedure is worth, it's gold in terms of being transparent, accountable, repeatable, making sure ownership and responsibility for the right stakeholder is communicated up front.
And is there anything missing from Shopify that isn't shared with Google Analytics today that is why server side is critical for Shopify website users?
I think Shopify, just to be really clear, Shopify is a fantastic platform. I take my hat off. It is an amazing platform, but relying on the out-of-the-box analytics implementation may not give you the full functionality of ecom tracking, say for example, which is what the Addingwell app does. It fills in some of the missing data points. It also gives you the ability to re-platform if you wanted to, because you've decoupled your analytics from the Shopify platform. I think that independence is a better architectural choice. I think there's a number of pluses there, and at the end of the day, you're going to get richer data.
And in terms of the Addingwell platform itself, what is the key feature for you that stands out the most?
I think for me, that would be tag health. I think the ability to have alerts on whether your data is being sent to the platforms that you're expecting it to land in is fantastic. It's not something you can get client side, and you kind of have to trust that is happening to whatever degree that is working. A good anecdote here would be around the client who had an alert, and I think it was 19 minutes from us getting the alert from Addingwell to being able to restore their data back to the marketing platform that they were using, which meant that they lost very little data. If that had been client side, depending on the number of times that the tag management was checked, it could have been days or weeks or months, or actually last year I saw someone who not checked their analytics container their tag management container in over a year. So could have been a long time. These things I think really benefit us as an agency trying to cover multiple clients at any one time, but also benefit clients to understand what is happening with their data. They can be more in control ultimately.
Think about that anecdote. The tag that was failing was a key meta conversion tag. So it was one of the most important tags on the site. And it will happen at some point that the API key may be expired, okay? And for me, the tag, I agree with Dan, the tag health is an absolute winner. But the ability then to say, okay, which tag, when did it fail, what was the event, and what was the error message within the log? Instant diagnosis. It's fantastic.
And what would the impact be for a client when they're tracking fails like that? Is that they're not able to transact, bid? How does that work?
Well, they would lose the visibility on this example, the meta conversion pixel. They would lose the ability to see which of their meta advertising campaigns had ultimately converted. Therefore, their bids would probably fail.
You're going to be flying blind.
Just be flying, yeah, we'd just be flying blind. You just wouldn't have any idea around what that would look like and how they could optimize until it's fixed.
You're either not going to be able to spend budget, or you're going to have an overspend. Either way, there is wastage, there is inefficiency. Media's hard right now. Media spend is the need for efficiency is more apparent now than ever before. Budgets are being cut, so what budget you do have, make sure it is spent effectively, and that's going to be very, very much dependent on the data quality.
Next, I'll jump to the future of Duga Digital. So, what's next for you both? What's coming soon? What can you tell us about?
Well, I think we're going to look to automate more. We're going to look to reduce costs for us and to try and make sure that we can be as lean as possible and maximize the value that we give to clients. I think there's going to be a bigger crossover between GMP and GCP coming down the line. That's where there is very little crossover at the moment, I think, in the marketplace, and actually we need to start bringing that much broader. So the idea around that would be things like profitability, making sure that profitability is the main aim of marketing departments, not looking at ROAS necessarily. I think these are the types of questions you want to start answering, and also just giving more confidence to clients in their data. The way that they come to us now is slightly dishevelled sometimes and slightly questioning, and they don't feel confident in themselves, and I can almost hear it and see it in the way that they're talking to us. And I think we want to bring that back and make sure that they are as robust as possible, and they feel confident about what they do.
Yeah, there are more APIs that are being rolled out.
Yeah.
More opportunities for integration, more opportunities for efficiency, more opportunities to make data collection as boring as possible. That goal again, to make it just undramatic, but the very highest quality. That's got to be the legitimate expectation, to have the highest quality with the minimal effort.
Cool. I think that's a good note to end on. So if anybody wants to find you, how can somebody get hold of Duga Digital?
Well, they can go to our website, which is www.dugadigital.com. Yep, that's how you spell it. Or they can email us at info@dugadigital.com. Or you can find me or Doug on LinkedIn, and happily have a chat.
I'm on Threads, Blue Sky, X, LinkedIn. I think that
You're out there. You're out there to be found.
Yes, I'm exposed, yeah.
Well, thank you very much for doing this interview with us, and we're really looking forward to working together.
Thanks so much.
That's true.
Thanks so much. Cool. Cheers, guys. That was really good.